Whatever one you're more comfortable.
I'll use this sitting here. This one so I can point in the right direction. Ah. Okay.
Well, good evening and welcome to your town hall. Ooh, that's loud. Having reached the hour of 6, I hereby call to order the meeting of the Sahuarita Town Council. And also, as always, inform everybody that tonight's meeting will be recorded. Tonight's invocation will be given by Stephanie Allred, from the Town Clerk's Department, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by the Mayor and Council, and audience in attendance. Stephanie.
Heavenly Father, we come before Thee this evening and thank Thee for the opportunity to meet in council chambers to discuss topics that affect our town. We are grateful for the leadership we have, the town council and town staff that support our community. As citizens of this country, we recognize and appreciate the freedoms and privileges we enjoy. We are grateful for the blessings of living in this beautiful town. We pray that the council is guided by wisdom and insight as they make decisions that affect our community. May our town council continue to be blessed through their efforts. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Stephanie. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I saw the flash of the flag, so that counts on the screen. Madam Clerk, may I have a roll?
Councilmember Bracco.
Here.
Councilmember Davis. Here. Councilmember Gillespie.
Here.
Councilmember Morales. Here. Councilmember Priolo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Egbert. Here. Mayor Murphy.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. And next we move to item number 5. This is a study session, as you saw by the agenda. The purpose of a study session is to discuss and address issues which require in-depth consideration by the town council. The sessions are for staff and council to exchange information and ideas. Because of this, the council is not expected to take an act on this item, and however, the council may direct staff for further action, provided consensus. Madam Clerk, if you'll read number 5.
Presentation and discussion on the town's consultant services and qualifications regarding their review of the Vulcan Asphalt Plant application, methodology used by the consultants in the review of the Vulcan Asphalt Air Modeling Study, and the potential mitigation strategies to public health and environmental impacts by the Vulcan Asphalt Plant.
Thank you. And Ms. Cassidy, Anna Cassidy is our Planning and Building Director, introduced the item, and contracted consultants Nino and Moore and Stamtech, and the consultants will help present this item. Anna, good evening, and please proceed.
Good evening, Mayor Murphy, members of the council. So tonight we have 2 consultants in our presence, some of them virtually and one in person. So what we have done is we've requested an air modeling study from Vulcan. This is in relation to a type 3 conditional use permit that's under review. And the purpose of requesting the air modeling study is to determine whether the potential impacts of an asphalt plant can be substantially mitigated as required by the town code for approval of a type 3 CUP. So we have sent the air modeling study out to 2 different consultants. We've hired Nino and Moore and also Stantec. Each consulting group has different scope. So Stantec was hired with a very limited scope. Their scope was to take the inputs used in Vulcan's air modeling study, run their own model, and see if they came up with the same result. Nino and Moore had a broader scope. They've actually been on this project since the beginning, so they've reviewed the conditional use permit application as well as the second submittal of that application, and they've provided their reviews of those application materials. We've also asked them to review the air modeling study. Both of the reviews are still in process. Staff is working with the consultants to make sure that we have everything we need in those studies and those reviews before they get released to the public. They will be released to the public as soon as they're in final format. So we have with us in person tonight from Nino and Moore, Fred Narcarati. We also have online Mark Gwatney from Nino and Moore, And Heriberto Robles, who is the toxicologist, may be joining us online. Fred is the principal at Nino and More. And Mark Watney is a principal engineer and environmental operations manager. Joining us from Stantec online, we have Kathy Howard, the engineering consultant from Stantec. And apologies if I mispronounce this, Shantanu Kangara, permit engineer, environmental scientist from Stantec. So with that, tonight we are here to talk about what is an air modeling study, what isn't an air modeling study, what it should include, what it doesn't include, when they're typically used. The consultants will talk about their qualifications to review these. What we're not doing is talking about results of those reviews because they're not complete yet.
Right. Thank you.
And with that, Shane, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, one of the things that we hope to take away from tonight's discussion with you is, we've got both consultants, ready to present. They'll talk briefly about the work that they've done up to this point in assisting staff as we've reviewed and processed Vulcan application. Obviously, you're going to hear from them on their approaches to analyzing the Vulcan air quality study. There's methodologies in that. One of the reasons why we have the reports from these companies as an ongoing process is because if they present to you their methodology and you have feedback on that methodology, you want them to include more by way of review or look-see, then they can still go back and incorporate that into the final report. At which point we would then turn that around and make that available to the public. So I just wanted to give that
Yep.
further context.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate that. And proceed, Anna.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Fred.
And I don't know if they instruct you, there's a little button you have to push on the base of that.
Good evening, Mayor Murphy and council members. My name is Fred Nakarati. I'm a principal and I'm the Tucson office manager with Nino and More. And I've been with Nino and More since 2009. My career, I've been in the field, the industry, construction, geotechnical, environmental consulting since 2001. So I have a little over 20 years experience and all direct experience related to Southern Arizona, in particular in the Tucson metropolitan region. I have a bachelor's of science from the University of Arizona with a focus on land and water, and I have a minor in chemistry and a minor in soil science as well. I have a master's in business administration, which I think sometimes does play a hand and help out, just giving a further in-depth knowledge of some of the studies that we do. Also, I do have Mark Gwatney online. Mark, if you could describe your qualifications, that'd be great as well.
Hello, this is Mark Watney, also with Nino Moore. I'm a principal engineer in the environmental operations for the Phoenix and all of Arizona. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Arizona, both as a mechanical and an environmental engineer. I'm also a certified hazardous materials manager through a national organization known as IHMM. Also have a master's degree in MBA. I've been practicing as an environmental consultant since 1987 in the Phoenix and Arizona since 1988. My first registration was in 1994. I'm involved in all types of environmental consulting work, including original air permitting, modifications, emissions inventories, done some air modeling as well. For this particular study, we got our principal toxicologist, Heriberto Robles, involved, and he reviewed the air modeling report that was prepared for Vulcan by Trinity. And I believe that there's a draft of that review somewhere. That's all I had at this time.
Thank you, Mark.
So,
If Herberto is not online, I can briefly describe his qualifications if you like.
Yeah, please proceed.
Okay. Herberto Robles has his PhD. His bachelor's degree was in 1980 from Universidad de Sonora in Sonora, Mexico. His MS is in Animal Science and Toxicology, 1983 from New Mexico State University. His PhD was in Animal Science and Toxicology, 1985, also from New Mexico State University. He has postdoctoral studies in immunotoxicology, 1986, University of Texas at El Paso. And he also has his certificate in hazardous materials management, or CHMM certification. He has a diplomat of the American Board of Toxicology since 1996. And that's basically what I have for him at this time.
Okay, thank you.
thank you, Mayor Murphy and council. So moving forward, well, we were engaged by the town of Sarita to act as the consultant initially when reviewing the conditional use permit for the Vulcan hot mix asphalt HMA plant in the town at the existing site, the sand and gravel site operations that are going on. During that time, we were reviewing this from our limited scope of services for the environmental. What we had saw in some of the stuff that they were supplying was, and some of the concerns from the residents were, we recommended that the town ask Vulcan to provide an air modeling study to focus on these specific items, which we're still reviewing right now. We do have some of those. We are in the process of doing that. And so basically we're here today to make sure that we can address what questions you have as mayor and the council members have, to where we can answer those for you today.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to start off, or just have Nino and Moore jump in?
Before we dive into the details, shall we have the Stantec consultants present their qualifications?
Yes, that would be good. Thank you.
Great. Kathy, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and take the lead on that.
Sure. My name is Kathy Howard, and I work for Stantec. I've been with Stantec, the Phoenix office, for 12 years now. My work is in air quality permitting and compliance. Prior to Stantec, I worked for Maricopa County Air Quality Department. I was there for a total of 15 years in various positions, including the compliance manager and the permitting supervisor.
Thank you. And is that the only Stantec person we have on?
We also have Shantanu Kangara.
Okay. If she'd like to present qualifications, this would be the time. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, this is Shantanu Kangara. I've been with Stantec, specifically air quality consulting, for 15 years. I have a master's degree from Arizona State in environmental fluid dynamics. My areas of expertise are dispersion modeling, ambient air monitoring, and greenhouse gas calculations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your qualifications. I will have Fred start out by talking about when air modeling studies are used and what their purpose is.
Okay. Thanks, Fred.
Mayor Murphy and council members. So the air modeling studies are not a typical part of the ADQ permitting process. So they do have a process to go through to do that, but the air modeling study, and which is what we recommended the town request of Vulcan for the conditional use permit, was to further understand where some of the concerns from the town constituents have. So such as the fallout, different nuisances such as odor, smoke, and such like that. And that's why we had recommended the air modeling to take a further step to analyze this on behalf of the town. But the air modeling permit is not required under ADEQ.
Anna, do you want to jump in there or just have him continue? So I was writing notes, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to let Fred continue, and if the council has any questions as he's speaking, please feel free to go ahead and get your questions in there.
Thank you. And Diane, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, Councilmember Priolo.
Fred, so I would like to know a list of all of the concerns that the air modeling study might capture, because our constituents have many concerns weighing on their hearts. And I'd like a list of every single one that this air, so I can have my expectations tempered to the scope of what an air modeling study does.
And if maybe, Fred, you can touch, I don't know if you can do it at this point, but, this will be a continuing process for a while. If there are some that you did specifically look at because of those concerns, if you can, again, I don't know if you could have a list tonight, but as many of those, if you can touch on from memory or from the, what you've been working on with the report. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Mayor Murphy, Councilmember Priolo. So what we're looking at in the air modeling study is, I can tell you that we're under review currently, but I can tell you some of the things that we're looking at, and I have some of the notes here that I've taken. So if that's okay, I'll let you know. And like I said, upon further review, we can go in further depth, since we are still in the process of reviewing the air modeling study. So what we're looking at a lot is the volatile organic compounds, the VOCs, is what those are. And then like PM10, 10 microns, particulate matter, and then PM 2.5, so particulate matter of 2.5 microns, and ozone. So what we're looking at is what other potential hazardous chemicals the plant could emit. Now, part of this does take into account of what they have looked at other operational sites they have in place, and I believe, if I recall correctly, they looked at about 10 different sites that Vulcan has, and they looked at that. Now, what's different on that, and we don't know exactly how it is at this point because we're still reviewing, is the type of fuel sources. So not all their plants use the same fuel source. Some use natural gas, some use waste oil, recycled waste oil as well. And so those have different constituents they will give off during that. And so that's what we have to look at to see exactly how this is going to be operating, what fuel source, and take a look at what those emittents are. So that's what we're looking at there. But as far as the full list, I don't have the full list of VOCs that are being looked at in this right now off the top of my head, since we are still reviewing it.
And maybe you could keep in mind that some residents might have asked for a particular VOC, but not all, whether natural gas or oils, emit all VOCs, I'm assuming. So some of them may not even be present, but if maybe you can differentiate in the future, that we looked at it, but it doesn't emit that, for instance.
Correct. Mayor Murphy, you're correct on that. And that's where we have to narrow it down. And so what we haven't seen at this point is that they have isolated what type of fuel source they're going to use. We have an understanding that it may be recycled waste oil, but we don't know for sure what it's going to be finalized upon. And that is correct. Some of the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds that are being requested in that may or may not be present as an emittent. So we need to understand that before we can thoroughly evaluate that. So there's going to be, I'm assuming after we get through the review of this report, that there may be additional questions that come out of it that will have to be requested of Trinity and Vulcan, Trinity, the consultants being Vulcan's person that conducted the air modeling.
Thanks.
I have a question. Out of the 10 sites that you guys are reviewing, how many of those are in Arizona?
Councilmember Morales, correct?
Yes.
If I recall correctly, I think 3 are within Arizona off the top of my head. I don't know for sure. I know they have, I think one is a local plant here. One is, and I think 2 are in the Phoenix metropolitan area, if I recall correctly. And from what I remember, it was 10 total sites that they gave data from, if I recall off the top of my head correctly.
All right. Thanks. Did you, Diane?
Pima County has 5 HMAPs. So could you help me to understand why we wouldn't be looking at the 5 HMAPs in Pima County, given the proximity to us and also wind, direction, all of that?
Councilmember Priolo, again, we are reviewing the air modeling study, so we are not conducting the air modeling study. Now, that may be a question for Stantec and how they are presenting their air modeling study, because they are doing a parallel air modeling study along with Trinity Consultants. The other part I can say is that the reason why they wouldn't is not all these competitors might be willing to share some of the data that they don't have to with other competitors. That's the only would be my assumption, but again, I can't really speak directly to that.
All right, thanks. Please continue.
Right.
Mayor Murphy and council members, I wasn't sure if there was any other particular directed questions that you guys have for me that I can answer at this point.
Yeah. I have a request. Could you give us a 101? I mean, because you're speaking as a very experienced engineer. You know, could you give us a little 101 on VOCs and what it is through your eyes so that lay people can perhaps follow along easier?
And maybe you'll go into a little depth on, about the VOCs, and I'm sure there's a spectrum of concerns or not concerns, certain types, and, which ones to be watching for, which ones ADEQ maybe, for instance, are required to mitigate, and maybe others that aren't, because we've had a lot of meetings about what authority that we have, and then you have PDEQ, ADEQ, OSHA, EDA, EPA, excuse me, those types of organizations. So maybe including that 101 kind of the ones that you would look at or would need to look at or not.
Sure, yes, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor Murphy and Councilmember Priolo. So to the high level layman person or layperson term of way to describe it. So a VOC is a volatile organic compound, and from what we're looking at here, I'll give you one look at it. So we're looking at it from the air permitting standpoint. So we're looking at what is going to be brought in vapor, smoke, emitted that way. There is also the way you can take a look at it with contamination to soil. You can look at it contamination to water, right? So we're not, for all intents and purposes right now, we're looking at from the air permitting standpoint as of today is what we're looking at. And so
All three, air, soil, water, or just air?
we are right now for the air modeling study, just looking at the air, so the admittance that way is what we're looking at. So what this is, it's basically the burning off of a petroleum-based product is what you're doing, and so it's the byproducts of burning of this for a fuel source or whatever heating that you're doing. So, and you have a lot of different byproducts that are done in this, and Mark Gwatney might be better to answer some of these questions here when it comes to that, since he has those specific towards the air modeling. So Mark, did you want to kind of take it from there and address this?
Well, one of our comments regarding the Vulcan Air model was that they really didn't discuss the individual volatile organic compounds. I believe based on their calculations, we estimated that they might emit as many as 8 tons of volatile organics annually. And they concluded that that does not exceed the air permit regulations. And I thought that was sufficient, but I think in our review of this document, we thought that that area could be expanded as far as what those volatile organics are and in what quantities and concentrations. And then also look at, based on prevailing winds and where those emissions might impact the surrounding communities.
And Mark, if I could just interject right there too, can you give a good layperson description of what a volatile organic compound is, and especially related to emittance for the air modeling?
And Mark, if you could include, this is Mayor Murphy, from a perspective, I'm sure all VOCs are not created equally, for instance. So if you can touch on that, on the ones that, from your experience, are more of concerning as opposed to less, And it could be a matter of what it is and the quantities that it could possibly be as well. So just be maybe as specific as you can as you're educating us.
Well, I don't have the list of volatile organics that we would expect from a facility such as this. Obviously, some volatiles are more problematic or dangerous than others, benzene being one as a known carcinogen. But I don't have the list. I think, I'm sorry that Herberto is not here to discuss his evaluation of their study, but I do believe he called out specific volatile organics that he was looking for in that air modeling study, and they were not discussed individually.
Yeah, if I can just add, Mayor.
For example, one more thing. For example, volatile hazardous air pollutants that he expected from a mixed asphalt plant include isooctane, hexane, benzene, ethylbenzene, formaldehyde, methyl chloroform, toluene, and xylene. And then he goes on to say that since not all VOCs can be evaluated at a minimum, the 8 VOCs listed above should have been evaluated as chemicals of potential concern for this Vulcan facility.
Now, when you said, Mark, that you don't have the list, is it because somebody else has it, or it wasn't provided as a breakdown from the air modeling study they did? I was just a little confused when you talked about the list.
I'm looking through the Vulcan report right now. It appears that they combined all VOCs in their air modeling study to come up with a total of 8 tons per year. Worst case scenario for NOx and VOC emissions. But they did not appreciate those VOCs. They just lumped them all together.
Okay, that's kind of what I was looking for.
Yes, Mayor Murphy and Councilmember Priolo, just to follow up on that. So it was, from what we understand, and like I said, we're still reviewing some of this, there was 7 criteria air pollutants that were evaluated in their air modeling study by Trinity Consultants. It was carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and PM10 and PM2.5.
And in your professional opinion, do you know why others wouldn't have been looked at or evaluated or submitted?
Yeah, so Mayor Murphy, I think, and from what I understand, again, so we did not commission the study ourselves.
Right.
It could have been the scope that was provided from Vulcan to Trinity along that line. That would be my assumption. And then again, I'm not sure if they have fully identified the fuel source, which would change that too. If we go from a natural gas to a waste oil, a recycled waste oil.
Right, or if they're asking for a hybrid where they could use both, then you'd have to really expand the scope, because natural gas would emit different VOCs than recycled oil would as well.
Mayor Murphy, that is correct.
Yes. Bill?
When do you expect to have this process finished? I mean, I kind of assumed that this was going to be a report on what you have found, and I keep hearing we haven't finished it yet. When is it going to be finished?
Councilmember Braccio?
Bracco.
Bracco, I'm sorry. Councilmember Bracco, I believe that we should have the report submitted to the town by the end of this week or next week for our air modeling review.
So this was, Bill, this was for, kind of a last-minute check-in to get an understanding as they get closer to the end, if there's additional questions or input that, we would like to have them. That's why it's in the form of a study session.
Well, I understand the study session, but I'm also looking at this, and it's talking about the potential mitigation strategies to public health, and we haven't even identified what they are yet. So how are we going to have the mitigation? This is just what we put on here, which is the purpose of this meeting.
Right. And it's still with the potential for either of the sources, right? That may change the additional investigation or asks that may follow, correct?
Mayor Murphy, yes, that's correct. And so, Councilmember Bracco, yes, that is part of it. We have to make sure that we're understanding that, and where there's any deficiencies that we may request additional information from what they have provided.
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor?
Shane, did you, I think, Shane, did you, oh, go ahead, Carol.
This is obviously not my expertise, so I am learning more than I ever expected to learn about air quality and all that stuff, so I appreciate this time let us to ask questions. I had heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, benzene is the more dangerous VOC. Am I correct in that?
Councilmember Egbert?
Egbert, yep.
All right. Councilmember Egbert, yes, it is one of the a known carcinogen is what that is.
Okay.
And so it all depends on the quantities, and it also depends on how it's dispersed, whether it's through vapor, smoke, emittance, water, and
Okay,
soil.
so my concern is the list that they gave you had 7, and I didn't hear benzene. Are we saying that the one that's somewhat the most dangerous is not being covered in this air model study that they gave us?
What is being covered from what we're reviewing is it's VOCs lumped together. So you can lump together volatile organic compounds. So even when you're testing for that, you can do a whole VOC or you can break them down, is what it is. In this case, we're probably recommended they need to further break down each VOC.
Yeah, because 8 tons of VOC, if most of it's benzene, I have some serious concerns.
Right.
So I would like to see what that looks like as to those, what are we talking about?
Understand, Councilmember Egbert. And again, like I said, during our review, we have not seen a breakdown of that yet. And so we just want to make sure that we're thoroughly looking at this to make sure.
And that's part of it. Tonight is if there's these kinds of identifications that are been identified, kind of important. That was sort of the, what's missing, so to speak, from there. Yes.
How do you do an analysis of an air modeling study? How do you do an air modeling study when the fuel isn't even identified?
Councilmember Bracco, that's
So it's a bunch of shit. I mean, that's what we're getting right now.
Councilmember Bracco, as again, we are only reviewing what we were
I'm
provided.
not blaming you for that.
Right.
But
Understood. I just want to make sure that we're clarifying.
I'll blame you for a whole lot of other things, but not that.
I completely understand, but I just want to make sure you understand we can only review with the
What's been
information we
submitted.
provided.
I know.
Right.
So,
And how it was provided.
so it's a pile of crap. Why don't we just kick it back and say, no good?
Well, we have to, but part of it is to go back and say what we want at the end of the day.
How do you do an air study without knowing what you're burning?
Well, one of the potentials is, let's just take it for granted, that, potentially it's both, right? So the way to cover it, in my opinion, is, there's only 2 fuel sources that I'm aware of that you ask for, because I'm sure they have some plants with one, some plants with others. I think there's some with a hybrid. So if it hasn't been decided, I think you ask for both to come in. Diane? Or we can continue and come back.
Councilman, this is Shantanu Kungar from Stantec.
I'm sorry. Oh, yes,
I have a
I see.
No,
If I could chime in. So what's in the report is, I believe they're not sure what fuel sources they will use, and so that's why they evaluated, they got numbers from 4 of their other plants, which have a mixture of either it's fuel oil or natural gas or propane. And so what they've done is modeled different configurations and put that in the report that, hey, we can use any of these configurations that we use at our other plants, and here are other results based on, these 4 different configurations.
But then they lumped all the VOCs together, so they haven't broken anything out that is of useful information.
And it could be, Bill, that if it's one type of fuel, the percentages could all, could change.
understand.
And then, not saying I'm agreeing, and some could be more,
We know some are
harmful.
more caustic than others,
Right,
but,
right.
and it
And you only
depends on
know
the fuel
based-
source, but
depends
they
on the
lumped
fuel
it all
source.
together, so it's just VOCs, which is
Right.
useless.
Right, right. Diane?
I'm going to be blunt. I'm feeling at a loss because I don't even know what questions to ask because I'm swimming in waters that are above my head. I need basic education first because I need to know what questions to know to ask. When I understand, when I could wrap my mind around VOCs, all the things that you're rattling off, I think we need to go back to square one, and I'm asking for the 101 so that I can ask intelligent questions so I can represent these constituents properly.
And part of it is maybe even going back to the ADEQ on what are their, what are their requirements for permitting, which VOCs, if not all of the above, or does it depend, like Bill said, depends on the fuel source, so you have to learn what those are. If you can maybe, just backtread a little bit, just to, maybe how that process works and what do they need to see at what levels or
Yes.
information-wise.
Okay, Mayor Murphy, Councilmember Briolo. So I'm going to leave this to Mark Guatney since he is our air permitting specialist and when he does that. So Mark, if you can give the mayor and council just a general understanding of what a volatile organic compound is, correct, Councilmember Briolo? I just want to make sure I'm answering your question. 'Cause
This isn't going to work for me. I'm a visual learner. I don't have any presentation like what we're normally used to with a.
Hold on one second,
I'm having a
Mark.
hard time with this.
Go ahead.
So you'd want a visual presentation on that?
I want to be able to see visually. You're just doing everything verbally. You're speaking very rapidly. It's not my field, and I need to understand this so I can ask intelligent questions and pursue this to my satisfaction.
Well, tonight, what we have is the folks on, that could be a follow-up, because that's part of what a study session is, that maybe a chart or what, know what the questions are, right, after this evening on how to sort of proceed from there. But since we do have you and Mark, I think at least we could start with the verbal and then maybe find out how we can follow up, that we could all study it a little bit deeper.
Sure, and Councilmember Priolo, so I understand now. I wasn't sure if you were just wanting that, and I knew you weren't getting that, right? And it's not necessarily a simple understanding, which is okay. I get that part of it. But if you would like to see a visual representation, I mean, I don't want to put it, like dumb it down too much for that, but I mean, you can understand maybe what that is, like almost like an acid rain, depiction, as you see how that goes through, like a recycling thing, how it affects when it's emitted and doing that. Would that be something that would be helpful after this to do that?
I need to understand how you know what you know so I can ask intelligent questions, and I feel hampered.
Okay, that's what I'm saying, and I'll let Mark Guatney speak to that because Mark is the air permitting specialist on this, if that's okay. But I just want to make sure I understand your question too. So you want to understand just the core of what a volatile organic compound is.
Not only that, but the methodology, how, I want to walk a mile in your moccasins.
Understood.
I need to understand so I can ask intelligent questions.
Understood. And again, so we are just reviewing the air modeling study and then do that, not
I
preparing
understand
that. So
No, I do understand that, but I don't, I haven't seen it, I haven't read it, I haven't read anything you've done, and nor would I know if I'd even understand it.
Exactly.
So can we start with basics?
and that's what I'm saying. I may defer to Stantec on this partially because Stantec is also preparing their own modeling study
Right.
on behalf of the town using that same
And with them
input.
listening, I think they have a greater understanding of where our struggles are and what we'd like to see.
Correct.
And they can take notes from that and actually be providing that to us.
And that's what I'm saying is that may be a bit more resourceful to you since they are actually preparing a modeling study mimicking what was requested of Trinity to do that. And so they can give that right there to you and that might help you more because they were diving into the details to provide that analysis, if that makes sense. We were just reviewing that part of it.
Yep. Sounds good. Mark? I hope you heard all of that. If you wanted to take a first stab at it, knowing that we'll have more information following in a more, I guess, readable footprint.
Mayor?
Yes.
Actually, before Mark jumps in, I'm actually wondering if it would behoove all of us to hear more from Stantec on the methodology or approach that they're taking in conducting their own study, instead of reacting right now, because we're looking for understanding just on methodology, instead of trying to react to what we've got from Vulcan, because that's all Nino and Moore is doing, is looking at. Now, I know that Nino and Moore has stated they have concerns in reviewing Vulcan's air quality study. We're not tonight intended to go into those concerns outside of saying, hey, there's concerns and there's constant dialogue between our consultants and staff in figuring out, okay, our recommendations, the list of conditions, making sure that it's comprehensive, and then trying to figure out our path forward in terms of making sure that between consultants and staff, you as a council are going to be fed and be delivered information that you feel is important to you in terms of making an educated decision when you go through this public hearing process. That was really the intent for tonight. As it relates to methodology, though, perhaps we can hear from our two reps from Stantec a little bit about their approach using the data sets that they received and maybe answer some of these questions that are on the table.
I would agree, Shane, and also based on the conversations they've been hearing from us, if they can elaborate on where they're concerned, from that perspective on what has, can they do a proper parallel modeling without all of the information potentially that they have right now. So Stantec, if you'd like to, I'm not sure who wants to go first, but feel free.
Sure, council members. This is Shantanu Kangar from Stantec.
And if you could just speak up a little louder or go a little closer to the mic, it's just a little hard to hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Yep, that's a little bit better.
Okay, so the purpose of an air modeling is, so an air modeling study is performed to predict whether the air quality impacts from a source, in this case Vulcan, will protect public health, general welfare, and physical property and the environment. Such a study is performed by incorporating the source's pollutant emissions. So, for example, for Vulcan, it would be, their hot mix asphalt drum, and the sources like their trucks, piles of material, the dust coming off of these sources. So those would be the emissions. Then the model also incorporates terrain data, for example, where it's actually situated near the city of Green Valley, what the terrain looks like, what are the elevations. It also incorporates actual meteorological data from a weather station nearby. So in this case, that weather station was the Tucson airport. And so 5 years of actual weather data from the Tucson airport was incorporated into the model. And then what the model does is it looks at how these emissions come out of the source and how they spread out, around the facility, going up to, the model can do up to 50 kilometers away from the facility. In this case, the analysis was done for about 30 kilometers. It's not normal to go out of 50. Typically, an analysis is for 5 to 10 kilometers. In this case, it was done for 30 kilometers. And the final numbers are compared to what are called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. These are set by the EPA. Sometimes states will have more stringent standards. So these, the final numbers are also compared to if there's something specific set by the state, in this case the ADQ. What also happens is these numbers are added to what's called the ambient background. So what is the concentration of these pollutants already in the air, and then what the source is putting out. So what the source puts out gets added to what's already in the air, and then that final number is compared to the national ambient air quality standards. And if you're below those standards, then it's the EPA and the state's understanding that public health, general welfare, physical property, and the environment are protected. And so that's how an air quality study is performed. Any other questions or clarifications on that?
Well, I would just ask if you were doing it from scratch, do you feel like there's anything missing that you would need to run a parallel comparison? Or do you think, because you heard some conversations about there's 3 different fuel sources, such as that, is there anything that you feel are missing to provide, to do a adequate parallel modeling?
So what we did and what we were scoped out for was to look at what was done and verify if it was done properly. My general overall statement would be it was done properly. I have some concerns on how some of the data was represented, and we have pointed that out in a memo that we provided to the city. And the other thing we did was we looked at, we were provided with the modeling files that Vulcan, that Trinity Consultants did for Vulcan. And so part of our analysis was, look at what's in their modeling files. Does it correspond to what they're talking about in their report? And then also to run like a test scenario and see that the numbers they're actually reporting in the report is what they got. So we did that, and they confirmed.
Now, do you think it'd also be helpful, because you heard conversations tonight that the VOCs were lumped together, would you expect, if they were broken out, again, based on, depending on the fuel source, that the model that either you'd parallel or that they would be submitting would come out differently?
So,
Here,
VOCs
Shantanu,
are...
why don't
Yeah, go ahead.
give a little bit of explanation here? Okay,
Yep, go ahead, Kathy.
So there's actually 2 different categories. There's the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds that we're talking about, and also hazardous air pollutants. And there are some compounds that are just a VOC, there's some that are just a HAP, and then there's some that are both. And typically when we're looking at air quality, VOCs is a total number. It's total VOCs. It's not looked at on the individual components. If you're looking at HAPs, however, that is looked at both singularly and totaled. So VOCs being combined is not unusual. And a little bit on VOCs. VOCs are compounds that have, like a high vapor pressure and low water solubility. And a lot of them are man-made or human-made. And they encompass things like solvents, certain components, like, they can be certain components of petroleum fuels, which is, what we're looking at here. Think of things like paint thinners, dry cleaning agents. These things all contain, some VOCs. It's something that, again, it's going to evaporate if left. Like if you put it in a container and leave it open to the air, it's going to.
The vice mayor mentioned that, certain chemicals such as benzene could be seen differently. So I think it's the desire, at least for some on the council, to understand the breakdown of these and then the various concentrations based on what type of fuel source would be used based on the outcome of it. I mean, so far, that's what I'm hearing,
Yeah.
and that's part of what, Simon?
Tom, a couple of questions, but I think, as Ms. Barco said, we've got to figure out what they're going to use to heat this thing. You know, propane and burnt fuel oils emit completely different chemicals. And yes, they're saying they're combining it all together. But obviously, if they're just going to run burnt or used oil through this, there is going to be benzene and a lot of other things coming out in the particulates. So I think that's one issue that's got to be resolved before, so that obviously the experts can do their study and we get the data and the community knows what's being used at the plant. Second issue, and this is more a question for you, Fred, or maybe one of the people here, I noticed on February 7th, the EPA issued new standards on, and I'll read it just here, fine particulate matter, basically improving or lowering the percentage by 25%. Is this study using those new standards or existing standards? And the reason I say that is, this plant obviously could be in place for many years. If they're putting it in under current standards, does that mean they're grandfathered and they don't have to improve to new standards? So that's kind of a question for anybody online is, which standards are being adopted for this plant?
Go ahead, Fred. If you want to start, anybody else can weigh in after that, but.
Yeah, Mayor Murphy, Councilmember Davis. So the new standards that are coming out, since it is not permitted yet, and it depends on how it's being adopted by ADEQ, that's what they would have to follow, whatever is currently in place at this time. But since they started this, they haven't actually done their ADEQ permit for this. When that goes in, they would have to follow those standards that are in place at that time. And I guess I would look to the Stantec folks also to see if, how they would weigh in on this as well.
Anybody from Stantec want to weigh in?
Yes, this is Shantanu Kangara. So the new standard, as mentioned, was published for PM 2.5, so that's particulate matter 2.5 microns in diameter or less. And the existing standard on an annual basis was 12 micrograms per meter cube. And the new standard is 9 micrograms per meter cube. Based on the analysis in this report that was submitted by Vulcan, they are just below the new standard.
Does that help, Simon?
Can I ask a quick follow-up
Yes.
question to that? Just before we go on to another topic, I'd hate to, because I think Simon had some other questions. Can I just have some clarification? If there are new standards that come out in a couple of years, are the asphalt plants required to adopt the new standards, or do they get grandfathered in after this? So if we all of a sudden find out that this is there's new research that says this is horrible, they have to change it. Are they required to change it, or do they get grandfathered in?
It all depends. Councilmember Egbert, it really depends. Sometimes they have to keep going through continuing compliance and they have to submit their reports. Because again, they may say they have a process that's in place and they'll be monitored. And so then they monitor specific plants, they monitor areas, right? And so when you get put into containment areas, they look at that and then they can come back and do that. There are certain things like they buy credits. You always hear about pollution credits and such like that. There can be weighed out for the area and they can be grandfathered in on certain things. So it depends. It's not always a one-for-one that they have to do that.
Well, back to the 101, because I've heard of water credits a lot, but I haven't heard of a pollution credit. Could you just, to help our 101, I don't even know what that means, and how do you get it, and credits?
Oh, correct. And this is something that, and again, I'm not the expert in this when it comes to pollution credits, but what they used to do a lot is we were looking at across the nation, you could have, when they were grandfathering in new facilities. So let's say you had somebody that was producing, steel. Okay, and so they've been producing steel since 1920, and their facility is not as efficient. So you have a new facility that comes online that uses all the updated standards, right? And so they're producing less pollution, way under the standard. They could sell those pollution credits back to that one that's not operating until they lower it. And that's something that was a nationwide standard that was done for years. Now, I don't know if that's still a practice that's handled that way, but that is one of those opportunities because you're looking at it collectively.
Thanks. Simon, did you have a follow-up? Diane, Dr. Gillespie, I haven't heard from you if you have if you have any feedback at this point. No, okay, Diane.
Santec. Let me see if my understanding is correct. Your role was to basically see if you could duplicate Vulcan's study and see if you came out with the same results? Am I accurate in that understanding?
Yes, that was one part. The second part was to make sure, based on EPA and ADEQ guidance, that the air quality study was done per the guidance, and not use cherry picking values to get their analysis done.
Okay. So my question to you is, if you had a blank slate and you could approach this air quality study with a goal to be able to advise this council, is anything that would be admitted by this plant, will it create harm? And is it within the legal limit, or does it exceed it? What would you do differently? Would you do it differently?
So to answer your first question, if I had a blank slate, I would have presented the information, and that was one of my comments, in a more clear manner in this report as to, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and here is the analysis for what I'm going to be doing at this particular site. The way the information was presented is, it's almost like we're not sure what exactly we're going to be doing here, and so here's the analysis for different plants, and we might do one of these things, and it is unclear to me if, even though these 4 plants that they did the analysis for, assuming they would be placed in Green Valley, past the standards or below the standards, it's just not clear to me what exactly this plant is going to do. And so I would want to make sure that, hey, this is the scenario that I'm going to be running. This is the heater, this is the fuel, this X amount of fuel is going to be used, and here's the analysis for that. I would have liked to see that. It is quite possible that what they end up doing here at Green Valley is exactly like one of these 4 plants, and so rest assured they're going to be below the standards, but it's not clear to me. I would like to see that see them explain that, hey, this is exactly what we're going to do, and this is our analysis for this scenario, and we pass. That is not clear to me. So that's probably my biggest criticism of the report.
Thanks, and I think that goes back to Councilman Bracco and Davis on kind of, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what we're analyzing because we don't know what's sort of, what's being submitted.
Well, they don't know what we don't know.
Right, so, so I think that was the point of a couple of my council members to my right. It's hard to know when you don't actually know how the operation is going to be. Yes, Debbie?
So I think I'm kind of having issues here with the fact that we hired a consultant that didn't go out and do a study, that didn't go out and get the counts or whatever a study entails. We're just going off of paperwork that Vulcan hired to do.
Anna, did you want to kind of just comment on that portion right there, just to?
Sure, I'll give that one a stab, and it looks like Shane might have something to say as well when or Shane, if you want to go first, either way. Okay, so Vulcan has to provide the data. The town does not have the data as to what is going to be burnt or emitted, so we can't produce that study. So Vulcan has to come up with their own parameters of what they're going to be doing there, and that's one of the comments we're hearing from the consultants, is that it's unclear what parameters they used when they prepared the study. I'm sure they have parameters or they couldn't have run it, but they did not make those clear in the study as to what the basis was for that study. But it's it's not something that the town can actually do because we don't have the proper
Well, you're not
input
under the
data.
operational control of it, so you don't know, you're not running it, so you don't know what the output would be, right?
Correct.
And would that include also, is it different if it's running 24/7 or 8 hours a day or 2 hours a day or whatever it might be? Because I think we're back to the genesis to my right on what are we evaluating when we don't know. But Fred, you want to weigh in on that?
Right, and before we have Fred weigh in
Yep.
on that, I want to reiterate that it's the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that impacts can be mitigated. It is not the town's responsibility to demonstrate that they can't. So we're really putting that burden on the applicant to show us that they can mitigate any potential impacts, and if they can't show us that those impacts are mitigated, then we have options.
Right. Shane? Sorry, Fred. I'm going to continue.
No, I couldn't have said it any better than
Right.
what Anna just did. I think it's important to note that, or reemphasize that this is Vulcan's application, and this is their proposed use. And so, I mean, what we try to do in terms of tackling this analysis is to have Nino and Moore take their actual study and analyze it. And I'm not sure if I'm clear, Fred, on the process that you go through as a company to look at an air quality study and your method in reviewing it. So maybe there's some light you can shed on that process. But knowing that was going to be a review of the actual report that we got from Vulcan, we then turned to Stantec and we said, okay, can you take the data sets that Vulcan provides and run it through your own modeling to see if you come up with a different answer? And that's essentially doing a double check on those numbers. And you heard that, they did that, and it seems to all fall under the standards, in terms of compliance, but it was unclear in terms of what their specific proposal is
Right.
out here on site. They provided data that would cover the gambit of different possibilities, different types of fuels. They even had propane there. They had the oil, they had natural gas, and they had propane. So, I mean, I don't know, in answer to Councilmember Morales's comment, I don't know what else we could do, because it's really Vulcan's data. It's their proposal, and they're going to be responsible for answering to the impacts of that proposal. We have consultants on board to evaluate everything that they submit from different angles, and we'll continue to do that. But it's their value and data sets that we have to respond to.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Debbie.
So at what part of the permitting process do they have to say, okay, we're going this route? Instead of giving us all this other, we've got three, at what point do they need to tell us?
24.
So that we can move forward from there?
Yes, Shane.
So they have not committed to a fuel source at this point in time, but nor have they been exposed to the pressure of standing at that microphone and fielding questions from the public, the Planning and Zoning Commission, then ultimately you guys as the council. And at the end of the day, I don't believe that they're going to get anywhere until they can commit to a fuel source and talk to the impacts of that operation. And so, I think that, that position from Vulcan is yet to be determined. But at some point in this process, I don't see them moving forward until they clarify that.
Right.
And in our,
Yep.
in our draft list of conditions, I think you even saw a recommendation from staff that there's a fuel source that we're recommending if this thing is even approved, and you do so with conditions, because we understand that there's one of those fuel sources that might be better than others in terms of the impacts on the environment and public health.
So Shane, is it appropriate going through the process, because you just mentioned there's a recommended fuel source, is it appropriate to go back to our consultants and say, okay, if this is the fuel source, can we break down the VOC, not us, ask them to break down the VOCs, not the lump, and those types of things as we're narrowing down initially staff's recommendations? Is that an appropriate ask?
I think that's a fair question for Fred or Kathy to respond to in terms of what they can and can't do. I think we heard from Stantec that under all of those scenarios, they fell below even the new standards that are being proposed by the 2.5 standard, so.
Right, but I still think I heard that it was, as they submitted it, they were grouped together.
The VOCs.
The VOCs, you know, from that perspective. But, you know, if it is that fuel source and there's concerns about benzene, you know, can it be narrowed down from what you heard, you know, just from what you even heard tonight? You know, a little more education, a little more clarity, a little bit more specifics. But again, it falls on Vulcan to submit or agree or tentatively narrow it down, because I think they're hearing from all of us up here.
Hey, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
just a point, and I think, you know, what we've been focusing on is this air quality study, which is one component of many that the applicant is attempting to push through. There's numerous other issues I see, you know, I've heard anywhere from 200 trucks to 500 trucks.
Right.
You know, it's almost like they're shooting for the moon, but the applicant, who, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, needs to submit what they're going to do here. And they've just said, well, we might put an asphalt plant in, it might do this, might do that. I'm supposed to vote yes or no, and I don't have the information.
Right.
So my request would be the applicant come back and tell us what they're really going to do.
Maybe more
Yeah,
specific.
and then we can get, you know, experts, traffic control, air quality studies done.
Air, I mean, water.
Yeah, water
You know.
and all the other things we need.
Right.
But just to, you know, shoot this thing out there and say, well, we might do this. It doesn't give me the information, I'm sure it doesn't make the public happy either.
Yep, Vice Mayor?
Diana, do you mind? I'm going to go first. Couple quick questions, just for clarification, and because it's been a year since I've been digesting all this information, so I apologize if this has already been answered to me before. So I noticed, Fred, when you were speaking, that this part of it was the health, protecting the health, I think, and that was also what somebody mentioned about the general health, general welfare, environmental, physical property. That was kind of what their standards were. Is there a level of study of nuisance? Because there's a difference between a health concern and a nuisance to it. Is that something that we can be part of this? Because air quality, there's definitely odor and fumes that come from that. Now, the health may not be, but the nuisance of it is something that adds to the quality of life. And I'm wondering if that's something that is quantifiable, and what does that look like, and is it part of the process? I don't know who can answer
Or is
that
it
question.
something that, you know, that maybe it's a John question?
Yeah,
to some
I don't know
degree,
who's going to ask you that question, but it's one I have.
You know, is that some of the things that we can look at? Because, you know, we've touched on some of these things, but a good point. I know for various other types of codes and things like that, nuisance has come into play, but I don't know if that's something that falls under you, or if that falls under a quality of life that the council can help weigh in on whether that can be mitigated. Because probably there may not be a VOC in an odor, there may not be particulates in an odor, but there is an odor, potentially. Mike? No.
Oh, there, okay. A legal use, or a use that's lawful under zoning, for instance, or allowed under zoning, can still constitute a nuisance depending on how that use is executed. So, for instance, you can have a house in a residential zone that is, you know, zoned, the use is allowable, but if, you know, that house has a bunch of cars on blocks, a bunch of
Parties
trash, a bunch of garbage, what have you, it can constitute a nuisance. So for our purposes, we would have to look at the town code, because the town code is what defines what a nuisance is. And it's under, you know, it's under sort of the property maintenance section of the code. So if, and I'd have to look it up, but you know, things like odor or smoke or dust that are unreasonable could constitute a nuisance. And then the town would go through a code enforcement type procedure to either get the property owner to abate the nuisance, to stop doing those things that are causing the nuisance. Doesn't mean that it necessarily goes away 100%. It, you know, depending on what that thing is that's creating the nuisance. So it's really kind of a separate issue. It has to be, it can't be something that's done in a vacuum or hypothetically. You actually have to apply real world, actual what's going on to determine whether or not something's a nuisance or not. And ultimately, a judge gets to decide in a civil nuisance enforcement type case. A judge gets to make the decision based on the facts presented, whether that property is being used or causing a nuisance to the public or to the public health or to neighboring property. So it's not a question I can tell you if right off the bat, but if an act or an activity violates the law, it can be what's called a per se nuisance in some circumstances. So if a property owner fails to maintain his or her property consistent with what town code requires in terms of trash or cars or smoke or dust, that can be in and of itself deemed a nuisance. And then you have to go through a process to sometimes get a court order to abate that nuisance.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. Is that all right?
Yep.
So, Fred, when you were initially speaking on air quality, you said we study fallout, odor, and smoke. I got those three things. There may have been a fourth one. I may have missed it in the chatting. My understanding, when I was taking notes, when Fred started talking, he said air quality, because you said we don't do soil, right? Well, we could do soil and water, but that's not. But the air quality you're looking at is fallout, odor, and smoke. Am I correct in those three things?
The smoke and the smoke can be done as far as like air quality as like a visual, and when you're talking about that, the odor is not taken into account with that because it's typically a nuisance is what that is. So the odors and the smoke can be a nuisance as well, and so it's not taken into account because it's something that's measurable differently when you're looking at that. And I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but I did mention the fallouts from those. But I think that was Stantec that was talking about the quality of life when we talked about that in the ambient air quality.
So then that's my next. Whoever's talked about odor and smoke and those type of things, like specifically the odor, I want that to be part of the study. Like, what does this look like odor-wise? What are the fumes? How much does it affect the quality, like the area nearby? How long does it last in the air? I want to know that aspect of an asphalt plant. And I want to know the VOCs, don't get me wrong, but to me, one of the aspects that I feel like has not been addressed is what does this going to smell in our community and how is it going to affect our residents? Because I think that is a significant thing.
And just to clarify, Fred, are those things that the Vice Mayor just mentioned, would that fall sort of like under us, or does that fall under ADEQ, or ADEQ doesn't even, or PDEQ, both? That's not part of what they would require.
So they're not going to require like the odor, right? Along that line. That's going to be something that's going to be a nuisance under the town.
Yep.
That's typically what's going to fall under on that.
Okay.
Is what that is. But as far as dust, smoke, which could qualify under that same thing. It's kind of a fine line there, how that goes for dust control. That's something that would come out in the particulate matter. That would be one thing that would be monitored in. But again, it depends on what they're looking at, and it's about data in, data out.
Right.
Okay, so again, only the data that you get, that you're using to put in, is only going to give you what you're calculating.
And I think that's what a lot of us are struggling with up here, as you heard from my right, that we don't know what we don't know. So how do you measure what we don't know?
Correct. So there is a little bit of back and forth on, we have to be solid on what they're going to be doing.
Right.
As it was mentioned by Stantec too, in order to get to where we need to be and to evaluate things correctly.
Right. Vice Mayor, did you want them to weigh in on whoever was the comment on the?
I think it was just that I'm requesting that we have some
Yep.
aspect of it. I have one other question that I have, I think, and then I'll be done, I think. Well, until I have the next question, really.
Vice Mayor, I'm sorry, please, I just want to make sure, can both Stantec and Nino and Moore react to the Vice Mayor's request to include elements in your reports that address specifically the odor issue? Can that be included?
From Nino and Moore, we can make sure that we address that in our review of the air modeling study for the odor and and the dust.
As well as maybe recommended mitigation if there is a mitigation for that?
Correct, yes. And I know there has been just some discussion on a blue smoke eliminator as one of the things that have been considered as well. So yes, we can make sure to note that in our review of the air modeling study.
And Stantec, is that agreeable to you as well, or doable as well, or both?
Yes, yes, it is. And just one point that I would like to make, though, is it's not, well, air quality permits typically do have like a vague condition about odor. It's not something that would be, that would be much better coming from the town because there's not really any teeth to it in permits. And it's the same thing. I've seen similar language in various permits. This facility actually would be getting their permit from Pima County rather than from the state. But they both have that type of language. And as far as smoke goes, I mean, they will have an opacity requirement for, like the stack, and that's a whole other thing to explain that. But there's there's certain percentages of opacity, that are allowed from certain operations, and so they will be required to monitor that, and it's at a level that I mean, you may observe it at the plant itself, but it's not necessarily going to leave a long smoke trail into the town or anything. But there will be something in the permit that addresses the smoke or the opacity, which is basically the smoke that you would see coming out of a stack.
Thank you, and thanks, Shane, for bringing up the point. I was going to make that a little bit later, that we're talking about a lot of conditions, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about how any of it, if possible, to be mitigated, and at what degree, because we've had a lot of conversation about substantially mitigated, which there's probably 7 different opinions up here on what that means. But thanks for the reminder that adding the mitigation, like the blue smoke emitter, for instance, when I toured the plant up in Mesa, there was a concrete containment cement tomb, basically, that if there's a spill, for instance, because there's been talk about water contamination and those types of things. So I think understanding what, if possible, the mitigations are and if to what level they can be, because I think that's where we're going to wrestle with the substantial mitigation, if at all.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize for the consultants who are really serving the council and the Planning and Zoning Commission going through this process. We recognize that there are a lot of these standards that are under the purview of the Department of Environmental Quality or PDEQ at the county level. However, I think we clearly understand that odor is one of those things that will fall under our umbrella as a municipality, and so leaning on our 2 consultants for suggestions, ideas about impacts and necessary mitigation strategies definitely needs to be on the radar, and I just wanted to make that point clear. Thanks.
Great. Yes.
I would also ask that staff look at other communities that have type of odor industries in their community and see if they have town code that have established what that nuisance odor would be and what that looks like. Because this is the first one in our community that potentially would have a significant odor, but there are other communities that have similar themes. And so I'd like to see.
We need to rule Battle Creek, Michigan, off that list because I lived there for a little bit, and the whole place smelled like Fruit Loops. That's where Kellogg's house is. So,
John, you haven't been to New Jersey.
Am I on now? Okay. So talking about whether you're talking about odor or smoke, the standards that are being applied to this application are the standards in the industrial standards for uses. So for purposes of odor, smoke, the minimum requirement is to meet for a use permit is to meet regulatory requirements. But for a conditional use permit, even if you meet regulatory requirements, those impacts the code says can't be a nuisance. And then the town code defines nuisance. It's specifically certain things, but it also generally says a nuisance is something that endangers the health, safety, life, limb, property, or cause any hurt, harm, inconvenience, discomfort, damage, or injury to any one or more residents of the town. So your decision when it comes down to these hearings is to determine whether or not the conditions that are being suggested or requested or imposed are sufficient to substantially mitigate, meaning that those impacts are no longer a nuisance, essentially, when it comes to smoke, noise, odor, ash, those kinds of things. So, and that's where, as we've talked before, that's where you have that discretion. So when you say that seven different people may have 7 different opinions about what substantial mitigation is, frankly, I would tell you that it's sort of your collective common sense that would determine that.
Right.
Is it going to cause harm or nuisance based on the information that's presented to you?
Right.
Not something you have to go out and hunt for, or the town to do its own study. As Anna said, in every case that you hear in a land use context, it's always the applicant's duty or obligation to prove why it should be awarded, or it should get its requested, land use change, whether it's a rezoning or whether it's a conditional use permit. So I think, again, you're going to hear a lot of science, but to the extent that you're applying your common sense and your life experience, that's what this comes down to. You don't have to base your decision on a scientific calculation or a mathematical equation to make your decision. It's going to come down to life experience, common sense, and being able to articulate why you're deciding one way or the other on this decision.
Right. And John, in that analysis, because you could be in the middle of the desert, right, with nothing around, or you could have crops on one side and residents on another side. So that would be appropriate to weave that in, especially from the nuisance standpoint, because again, if you're in the middle of the desert, the nuisance factor is probably closer to 0, right?
That's fair, but I think that, and that's where the consultants come in, to tell you that the studies that have been done or the analyses that have been done are fair comparisons to what is being proposed here, or not fair comparisons. That's I think where they're going to come in sort of most handy, I believe. I mean, they're going to talk at PhD levels on some science, which none of us are going to understand, but that's fine. But I mean, no, because it's really not your, it's what they're going to sort of boil it down to. And tell you, and I think part of the analysis is going to be, once it's done, is this even a fair comparison? Or as Councilmember Bracco says, are they giving you a study in this particular instance?
Right.
Are they giving you a study that's usable for you to allow you to make a decision?
Informed decision on. Yep. Shane?
I really appreciate John's comments. I think it just underscores the importance for all of us to remember that the burden of proof is going to be on the applicant. It always is on the applicant in any land use case that comes before this town. The applicant has the burden of proof, or prove the positive, prove the negative. It's not the city's responsibility, the town's responsibility to go out and do our own proofing.
Right.
I mean, we can respond and react and analyze all we want on the information that they give forward. And then you take that and you add to it what John just said about the fact that this is really a gut check by the council, application of real life experience, people living in the community, working in the community, playing in the community. You take that application, that perspective, apply it to what you're hearing tonight, or not just tonight, but during this process going forward. And then you make the best decision you can in terms of what's right for the community.
Right. Thank you.
But the burden is on Vulcan.
Yep. And I was going to go to you, Anna, because I haven't heard from you in a while, and I wanted to check in to see if you've heard a lot of this, and is there anything you want to weigh in on or clarify or?
Yes, I actually wanted to jump in as we're talking about nuisances and the effect on the community. Something that's come up over and over again from the public comments, and also is, I know, heavy on the council's mind and heavy on staff's mind, that the nearest neighborhood is not the general population. It is a more sensitive community. It's 55 and up. So we have asked the consultants to pay special attention to that and to comment on whether the NAAQs, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, are meant to protect the general population or whether they're focused on the more sensitive populations. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that as we're reviewing this, the nearest community is Quail Creek, but in between the Vulcan site and Quail Creek is land that is owned by the State Land Department, and it's planned in our long-range plan for medium-density residential. So as we're reviewing this, we need to keep that in mind, that there could be people not just the half a mile away that Quail Creek is, but 300 feet away.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Fred, before I totally forget, you mentioned EPA, which is a national, federal, right, organization, but then you touched on that there's different states that set different standards. So how do they circumvent if EPA is here, right? The state doesn't get to say, well, we're going to be twice as loose as a federal standard, because I always thought you had to go to your highest federal or highest governmental level, and you can't sort of circumvent that. But can you just clarify that? I remember you said that a long time ago.
Yes, Mayor Murphy. So yes, what it is you are looking at that you have to be able to abide by those, and so it's the most stringent, and then you're going down from there is what it is. So if the EPA is the most stringent in this case, that's what's going to have to be applicable in here. And then usually what happens is it just gets more stringent as you go to ADQ, county level,
Oh, I
town
see.
level. Yeah.
Okay. And can you touch on that for the state of Arizona? Is the federal level the highest, and does ADEQ, PDEQ just reflect that, or is it more stringent, as it cascades down, or not?
Yeah, it is more stringent, and as you take a look at like Maricopa County too, and their environmental quality, they're a larger area, but they also have more population. They're under more strict guidelines because of some of the plants that have come into operation and various other things, vehicle emissions and such like that. They're in a different attainment area than we are in Pima County, and that's they're taking out. Each one's taken is broken down individually for that area. So, it comes ADEQ, and then each county has that, and for us it would be PDEQ is what it would be in this case. But yeah, so they have to take a look at that. And again, there are, even if this were to be permitted, and even the plants that are currently permitted within Pima County, they still have to hit those standards, and if they don't hit those standards, they're in violations, is what that's going to happen. And then it could change the whole attainment area.
Right.
I have a follow-up question on that, if you don't mind. There was mentioned a couple times like that there can be, federal, state, county, and city. If a city were to establish their own regulations on those type of things, would they need to be able to staff and be able to maintain it? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there anybody in the state of Arizona that you're aware of that does that on their own? Or is it all on the county and state?
I'm not aware of anybody within the state of Arizona that does it on a local municipality level. It's usually done outside of the county level. Typically, the county handles that.
And just let me clarify, too. Before a town or a city, other than maybe a charter, can adopt air quality standards, it would have to have the statutory authority to do so. And there's nothing in, for instance, Title IX, which is the public law, or the public, the law for general law cities, doesn't give cities and towns any authority to adopt their own air quality standards. And in fact, cities and towns can't even have regulations about plastic bags, right? I mean, this is what the legislature has done to have, uniform regulations. So don't expect that anytime soon.
So you're saying that I have to go to the state legislature to get that fixed?
Yeah, good luck. I mean, no, seriously.
I just wanted, that was for
right,
knowledge
but,
and information.
Yeah, right.
So.
But that's part of the legislative battle we fight constantly, is the legislature keeps wanting to have uniform laws across the state. The problem is the state isn't uniform.
Right.
Thank you.
there's.
Thank you. Questions to my right? Nope. Questions to my left? On there, I think still, Diane?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm speaking to ensure my understanding. The HMA plants are regulated by 6 different federal agencies?
Councilmember Priolo, so when you're saying regulated by 6 different agencies, are you talking about for which, I mean, just for air or what? I don't,
The
in
whole
fact,
shebang,
Yeah.
that in order for an HMA plant to pass muster, to achieve a permit from, say, ADEQ, that they have to meet the standards set by these 6 different agencies. I can't rattle them off. I researched it a while ago, but I know the EPA is one of them. Is
yeah. So you-
thereabouts, is that accurate?
that's what I was just trying to count through in my head. I was just looking around in my head, I guess. So yeah, so, and again, you're not just talking about air or environmental, you're talking about in
The whole
general.
shebang.
Yeah, it's got to be at least 6 is what I would think, you know, when you're looking about that. Because again, I know it was mentioned earlier by one of the other council members, you have traffic, right? So that's going to be regulated as well as, you know, you're looking at water, anything with that secondary containment. When you said, Mayor Murphy, you visited one of the plants up in the Mesa, I believe it was. So that concrete structure is known as secondary containment in case there was ever a release of a chemical on site. That way it doesn't get into the soil and the groundwater. You know, OSHA. You name, there's at least-
Arizona Mining,
yeah.
is Arizona Mining one of them?
Um,
Yeah?
that's already, and it depends if they're doing any mining there. I don't know, because.
The aggregate is what's being mined.
So if
on
they're
site.
if they're mining it there on site, and I think that's already permitted if I
Right,
if I
it
recall
is.
correctly. So, yeah. So you have that. You have a mining permit. You have ADEQ. You know, EPA. You have your own local town. You have OSHA. You have numerous other things, but there's at least probably 6, is what I would say.
Okay. So when this Vulcan plant was first proposed, and I began doing my own research and my own deep dive to try to understand this industry, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeking to ensure understanding, but that ADEQ and permitting agencies like them will permit and allow an acceptable level of pollution that's deemed not harmful to health and well-being in the general public. Is that generally accurate? That they're not saying there's no harm, but that what is allowed isn't so bad that it's really going to hurt somebody?
Councilmember Priolo, you're correct in that, and then it also depends on the quantity of what they generate. So that's a lot of what it comes down to, and one is understanding the quantity of what they generate. But from there, once we get the information on how they're gonna, the emittance, then it becomes a mathematical equation. So if it was, say, 200,000 tons a year versus 500,000 tons, if they based it on 200,000 tons and they're anticipating 500,000 tons, then we multiply that by 2.5 times to get that. And so the allowable factors is what we look into. But yes, you're correct in that.
Okay, and the things that I read from various sources was that odor is not considered harmful, although that it's going to hurt you. Although I love the discussion, thank you, Kara, about the discussion on nuisance, because at one of these meetings, there was a handout from our constituents on odor, and it said, oh, odors aren't going to hurt you, but I guess the right term was maybe nuisance. I don't recall if it said nuisance, but it did talk about if there's a bad odor and you have health conditions, stay inside until the odor passes, things like that.
So
Does that speak to nuisance? Am I wrapping my mind around this accurately? Help me out.
Yeah, Councilmember Priolo, if I can take a stab at what you're saying there. So there are odors that are, contaminants, you know what I mean, as far as a sulfur, right? That can be actually an irritant to you as well. And then there's the off-gassing, something that is not going to be a health hazard, but does not mean that it's not a nuisance. So
Right.
there's a big difference in
The
those.
difference between health hazard and nuisance.
Correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Fred, and maybe Stan Tech as well, you've heard, from all of us, or staff, do you feel like you have enough direction to deep dive a little bit better and understand what I think the council is looking for?
Yes, Mayor Murphy, if I can respond first on behalf of Nino and Moore, I think we have a good understanding of what we need to do to wrap up our review of the air modeling study, and then also to make the recommendations for that review on behalf of the town.
Thank you. Stan Tech?
Yes, I agree. I think we can move forward at this point in time.
Thank you. Right, good. Good to my left. At least remember, we haven't even got to P&Z, we haven't even got to the town council yet. This is, the work in progress before I wrap up. Diane?
Clarification, please. Are we talking about just the impact on air? When do we get to water, soil, animals?
Traffic.
Plants?
Traffic?
Well, that's in a whole other story. But I'm talking about the environmental impact on health and well-being, animals, plants, aquifer, so on and so forth.
So, Councilmember Briolo, yes, correct. Right now, we are just looking at the air modeling study, which will take into account some of the items you mentioned, such as, the impacts to health and, plants nearby. And that's going to probably come out of one of the items that we're going to request additional information. But yes, this is, as the town directs us as your consultant for this, us and Stantec, we can take a look at those other items as we come across them as you need. But at this point, we're just looking at the air modeling review. And like I said, some of it will be incorporated in that, but not everything at this point.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any last words, Stan Tech, or you think you're good?
No, I think we're good.
All right, thank you. Having no more further business for the town council, we're adjourned. Thank you, Fred.